We've been asking where you're from, but yesterday Mr. Commentator made it clear his hometown is none of our business. Where am I watching, or rather, listening from? Because this is an audio story, not a video. Well, I am listening from a chair in my home office while I recoup from a bad fall. Oh, you want specific location? No! Where I live is none of your bamdoosiness. This trend of asking people where they are is creepy as F. Then tell us, what are you doing while you listen to our story? Maybe you're drinking beer, fishing, or getting busy with someone else's wife? Now, let's dive into the story. Never thought life would take such a sharp turn. Looking back, it all seems inevitable, yet at the time I was oblivious. Maybe that's how fate works. Quietly weaving its threads while we go about our lives, unaware of the moment it all begins to unravel. There was a time when my world felt solid, my future certain. I had a wife, a steady job, and a clear path forward. If someone had told me then that everything would collapse, that I'd find myself picking up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized, I would have laughed. But life has a way of teaching lessons in the most brutal ways. Looking back now, with enough distance to see things clearly, the whole situation was nothing but reckless stupidity. Someone rushed to conclusions, failed to check the facts, and made an inexcusable mistake, convinced they were justified. Even when the truth became clear, pride wouldn't allow any admission of guilt. It was easier to live in denial than to take responsibility. If that pride is all she has, I hope it keeps her warm at night. The pain was real, the anger overwhelming. I survived, but some wounds linger. Seeing families with young children still stings. Imagining what could have been. The laughter of a little girl. The pride of teaching a son to catch a ball. But in the end, I'm grateful it fell apart before we had kids. The idea of being a part-time father is unbearable. We were young. Even now, 3 years later, I'm only 28 and she's 26. We married early. She was 21 and I had just turned 23. We had dreams of a house, kids, a comfortable life in the suburbs. Anita wasn't strikingly beautiful, but she had a charm about her. With reddish blonde hair, green eyes, and a petite frame, she turned heads when she dressed up. I wasn't conventionally handsome, but I was solid. Tall, well-built from work and the gym, with long light brown hair and gray eyes. Together, we made a striking pair. We were rednecks through and through, raised with strong family values and a deep disdain for broken promises, especially when those promises were wedding vows. Most of our friends had also married young, and many were already divorced, often due to money or infidelity. We considered ourselves lucky. Right out of high school, I started working in a factory that specialized in German car parts. The pay was decent, and I made sure to prove my worth. I learned every machine, took on overtime, and even shadowed mechanics until I could handle basic repairs myself. My dedication paid off, and I moved up to training new hires. That effort didn't go unnoticed. When a shift supervisor discovered new employees using training videos I had created on their phones against company policy, it sparked a confrontation. Instead of backing down, I made my case, arguing that structured training would only improve productivity. The gamble worked, and instead of being reprimanded, I was given a raise and officially put in charge of training. Anita was thrilled. She worked full-time while studying part-time for her nursing degree. If she had taken a full course load, she could have finished in a year. But we agreed she should focus on her studies. I picked up extra shifts, and a year later, we sat in the audience, surrounded by family, as she became the first in either of our families to earn a college degree. Even as a training supervisor, I remained on the night shift. It allowed me to assist second shift workers and stay after to help the first shift while maximizing my time with Anita. After graduation, she explored entry-level nursing positions, but found that most places offered low starting salaries with no real promise of advancement. A chance visit to the emergency room with a friend changed everything. The hospital was severely understaffed on night shifts, and the pay for overnight nurses was significantly higher. She applied, got hired, and within weeks, she was working weekend night shifts with a salary that far exceeded other entry-level jobs. With both our incomes, money was no longer an issue. We kept our expenses low and saved aggressively, inching closer to our dream of owning a home and land. A year passed, and we had mastered balancing our schedules to spend as much time together as possible. Mornings were shared over breakfast, and our time together, both inside and outside the bedroom, was as strong as ever. Life was good. Then everything changed. One of my closest friends, a guy we called Zippy, moved to the US from Mexico when he was 6. He struggled a bit in school, so Billy and I helped him out since we all lived nearby. His nickname came from a baseball game. We pulled off a rare triple play, and in his excitement, he tried to yell yippee, but it came out as zippy. The name stuck. Despite his heritage, he was a full-fledged country boy. Beat-up cap, Redmond chewing tobacco, and even a Confederate flag tattoo. Zippy was hard-working, still lived at home, and helped with the bills. He didn't drink much, had good manners, but his biggest passion was carp fishing. It wasn't about eating the fish. It was all about the jackpots. You'd pay to fish at stocked ponds with big payouts for catching a fish of a specific weight. The pot could build up for months, sometimes reaching over $1,000. It was too pricey for me, but Zippy was single, made decent money, and was hooked on it, sometimes even winning, though probably losing more in the long run. Every serious angler had their secret bait, and Zippy was no different. His experiments with baits stunk up his mom's kitchen so badly that she forced him to set up a shed outside. Billy and I helped him put it together and even assisted in mixing sometimes, when we could stomach the smell. Billy, training to take over his dad's pharmacy, had an interest in chemistry. One day, after hearing Zippy complain about his latest bait mix, he suggested we could create something better using science. Our first attempts were disasters. I'm pretty sure we scared fish to the other side of the pond, but research revealed that carp were scavengers drawn to heat, and Billy found a chemical that reacted with dough to create warmth. The bait worked, at first, then it melted too fast, letting the fish get the food without the hook. Still, Zippy won 3 jackpots in one night, taking home nearly $700. His success drew too much attention, so he started rotating ponds to avoid suspicion. Other fishermen would leave if they thought someone had an unfair edge, and pond owners didn't like frequent winners. To fix the melting bait issue, Zippy's mom gave him an idea. She used old tights to store garlic and onions, so we tried wrapping the bait in a fine mesh. It worked. We kept refining the mix. I suggested chicken livers, Billy added coffee grounds for chemical balance, and Zippy used yellow grains to bind everything together. Our odds improved, but the real breakthrough happened by accident. Billy's mom gave him a bag of old cosmetics and perfume to toss out. Somehow, perfume leaked onto his bait bucket's mesh lid. That night, without realizing what had happened, he used the bait and caught 5 carp in 45 minutes, winning multiple jackpots. When he figured it out, we tested it at another pond. Same results. Realizing we had something big, we mapped out all the carp ponds across 7 counties, 51 in total. Zippy gave us a crash course in pond fishing strategy, and from there we carefully planned our next moves. Billy and I each picked up a pair of classic Zebco 33 reels on simple 5.5-foot rods. Nothing fancy, just reliable, affordable gear that helped us blend in. We didn't want to attract attention, so we avoided fishing the same pond at the same time, sticking to a rotation and never returning to the same spot for at least a month. My first night out, I must have looked like a clueless rookie, fumbling my way through it, but after 7 hours, I had won 4 hourly jackpots. 3 for the biggest catch and 1 for the smallest, totaling nearly $600. Everyone assumed it was beginner's luck. Billy pulled in $400 and Zippy won $500. In one weekend, we had nearly $1,500 in cash. To keep things low-key, we stashed the money in a coffee can in the shed and agreed not to touch it until the end of the season. Within 4 weeks, our winnings had climbed to $6,300. We also disguised our bait by storing it in buckets labeled with commercial brands after tossing out the original contents. At home, Nita was starting to get suspicious. One morning, after I came home reeking of our bait mix, she wrinkled her nose and made a comment about me smelling like cheap perfume and garbage. She knew about our fishing experiments, but I hadn't told her how much we were making. My plan was to surprise her at the end of the season with a pile of cash and tell her to start house hunting. For a while, life was good. We were winning, spending weekends fishing, and having the time of our lives. But greed got the best of us. As the weather cooled, most ponds shut down for the season. When they reopened, we got reckless, fishing every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We didn't realize we were being watched. Pond owners talked, and our so-called beginner's luck had made us famous. Zippy, in particular, stood out. He wasn't hard to spot among the usual crowd of pale, overweight rednecks, especially since he kept winning. Tensions at home grew. Nita resented how much time I spent away. Billy's wife was also unhappy. We agreed to take a week off, thinking it would smooth things over. That plan fell apart when Nita went grocery shopping and ran into a cashier friend. In casual conversation, the woman jokingly mentioned how I had been at Walmart the day before, buying perfume, tights, and protections. She laughed about how she wished she could be a fly on our wall. Nita didn't laugh. She had known about our bait experiments, but not the details. When she got home, she tore through the house looking for evidence of whatever she thought was going on. She found nothing, because everything was in the bait shed. The protections had been a fluke. One night, Zippy accidentally grabbed the wrong bucket of bait and called Billy in a panic. Billy brought the right one but forgot the tights we used to hold the bait together. Frustrated, Zippy was about to give up when Billy had an idea. He pulled a pack of protections from his truck and handed them over with a grin. It turned out they worked even better than tights, stronger, longer lasting, and easy to cut into the perfect size. From then on, we all kept protections and pantyhose in our glove compartments as part of our fishing gear. Unfortunately, that's exactly where Nita checked next. She found 2 pairs of used pantyhose and an open box of protections with 2 missing. Worse, the tights had belonged to Billy's wife. She'd given us several pairs to use. To Nita, though, it looked like undeniable proof of something else entirely. And that was the beginning of the end. Nita had always struggled with her temper, but that day she completely lost control. The morning started with all 4 of my tires slashed, the rearview mirror torn off, and my fishing rods crushed in the driveway. Inside, a message smeared in lipstick on the bathroom mirror made it clear. She was furious. Worried, I called everyone I could think of. Her mother, her friends, even the hospital. No one had seen her, though one friend admitted she had called. The details were vague, but the warning was clear. If what she said was true, I should run. If not, I needed to find her fast. Unable to reach her, I went to work but couldn't focus. By 4 a.m., I gave up, told my manager I was leaving, and headed home. On the way, I stopped at Walmart to replace my ruined fishing gear, hoping that if I could smooth things over, maybe explaining everything, including the money, would help. Pulling into the lot, I noticed an out-of-place BMW among the usual trucks and compacts. At first, I ignored it, just relieved to see Nita's car. But as soon as I stepped inside, I heard sounds from the bedroom that left no room for doubt. Without hesitation, I kicked the door open and saw exactly what I expected. Nita was in bed with someone else. Her expression shifted from shock to anger, as if she had been waiting for this confrontation. The man with her was a doctor from the ER, one with a well-known reputation for chasing married women. She had once told me she couldn't stand him. Clearly, things had changed. The doctor jumped up, trying to act tough, but he never saw the fishing rod in my hands as a threat. That changed when the first strike landed hard between his legs, sending him crumpling in agony. When he raised his hands in defense, the second swing cracked against his fingers. A few more hits and he was on the ground, scrambling to escape. Then everything escalated. Nita grabbed my Colt Python and aimed it at me, her anger burning as she accused me of having no right to be upset. According to her, this was just payback. If I didn't accept it, it would happen again. She expected control of the situation, assuming I would back down. But I didn't. Instead of fear, I laughed and called her bluff. The doctor, still crawling toward the door, barely made it out as I shoved him along with well-placed kicks. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the shouting and screams. They scattered when the tool fired. For a moment, I thought I had been hit. But there was no pain. She had missed. A fresh hole in the ceiling confirmed it. Still furious, she aimed again, promising that next time the bullet would find its mark. At that moment, flashing lights filled the street. Neighbors had called the police, and officers arrived just in time to see her, standing outside completely without clothes, waving a loaded tool. The night had already spiraled out of control. Now, it was about to get even worse. The man who had helped Nita betray me was still without clothes, desperately crawling toward his car. But the moment the loud crack echoed, he froze, hands over his head, pleading for his life, apologizing over and over for sleeping with my wife. Meanwhile, I stood there, fully dressed, arms raised. The situation had spiraled into complete chaos. The police were shouting at Nita, she was screaming at me, and the doctor, caught in the middle, begged her not to shoot. For a brief second, she hesitated, eyes darting between the officers and me. But when she shifted her aim toward them, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed her wrist, knowing they were moments away from firing. The tool slipped from her grip, and I quickly tossed it toward the cops before tackling her to the ground. Handcuffs were on us both in seconds. That night, we all got a free ride to jail. I was charged with attack for attacking the doctor and domestic violence for hitting Nita. She faced even more serious accusations: attacking an officer with a tool, making threats, indecent exposure, and discharging a firearm within city limits. If they had found anything to pin on the doctor, they would have. But in the end, he walked free. His wife wasn't as forgiving. She had to come down to the station with a change of clothes, then wasted no time filing for divorce. Nita was named in the complaint, and the scandal became public knowledge. His wife also tried to sue the hospital, exposing his entire affair. He disappeared soon after, vanishing without a trace. It took her almost a year to track him down. He had quietly relocated overseas and was working in a clinic abroad. She had already claimed most of their assets, but he still owed alimony, including back payments. I had barely escaped the worst of it. And for once, that wasn't just a metaphor. The prosecutor wanted no part in this disaster and decided to drop my charges. Nita wasn't as lucky. Pointing a loaded tool at the police came with consequences. She was sentenced to an anger management course and 200 hours of community service. Zippy and Billy bailed me out using some of our fishing money. I made it clear that I wasn't going to do the same for Nita. Her parents had to come and get her, giving me enough time to pack my things and leave town. For 3 weeks, she didn't reach out. Maybe she expected an apology. But when I didn't break the silence, she finally called, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She acted like nothing had happened, casually telling me to come home. I refused without hesitation. She scoffed and denied everything, insisting she had never cheated, that my accusations were baseless, and that she could never trust me again. Her tone only changed when I deliberately called her by her full name, Anita, instead of Nita. That's when she finally softened, trying a different approach. She admitted she might have made a mistake and suggested we talk it through like adults. I wasn't interested. Mocking her attempt at reconciliation, I sarcastically pretended to consider her offer before making it crystal clear there was no going back. She didn't call again until the next day. I knew exactly why. The divorce papers were scheduled for delivery at 2 p.m. By 2:30, my phone rang. This time, there were no insults or demands, just quiet sobbing. I kept my voice calm, explaining that while I regretted how things had ended, there was no undoing the damage. She had destroyed our marriage too easily for me to ever trust her again. There was no way forward, except through divorce, and I asked her not to fight it. She fought anyway, delayed the process at every turn, but eventually, the judge lost patience. I had ignored every meeting, seeing no point in dragging things out. Looking back, maybe I should have attended, because the judge ordered mandatory counseling, 1 solo session for each of us and 10 joint ones. I only agreed under one condition. If I still wanted the divorce after counseling, it would proceed without further obstacles. If not, I'd risk contempt of court and possible jail time. When I made my case, the judge seemed to recognize the futility of it all but upheld the order, requiring Anita to do the same. She chose the counselor. When I arrived for our first session, I immediately had doubts. The man was young, probably in his 30s, and something about him seemed off. Right away, I asked how long he had been practicing. His response, 6 years, didn't inspire much confidence. I pressed further, asking if he was good at his job. He straightened, clearly proud of his success rate, claiming it was one of the highest in the state. That only made me more skeptical. I bluntly informed him that I wasn't there for reconciliation. This was nothing more than a legal obligation for me, and I had no interest in salvaging my marriage. If he thought he could push an agenda rather than remain neutral, he was wasting his time. I had even looked into his record and found complaints, 4 in total, 3 from men and 1 from a woman, alleging that he prioritized his own statistics over his client's real needs. Then I checked my watch. Time was up. Without waiting for a response, I let him know I'd be back next week at exactly 6. The expression on his face was priceless, like a fish gasping for air. The first 2 counseling sessions were unbearable. The therapist wanted us to sit together on the couch facing him, but I chose a chair instead. He didn't hide his disapproval. The first hour was spent revisiting Anita's so-called mistake. The second hour, more of the same. When she started repeating herself yet again, I pulled out a newspaper and began reading. Their stunned silence stretched between us before the therapist finally asked what I was doing. Without looking up, I continued flipping pages and made it clear I wasn't here to listen to reruns. If he planned to let her dominate the conversation without refocusing on real issues, I'd sit quietly and read. The irritation was evident in his body language. He tried to push back, but I cut him off, reminding him that we weren't on a first-name basis, and if he wanted to address me, it would be as Mr. Hart. His confusion turned to frustration, and he warned that he could report my lack of participation to the judge. I shrugged off the threat. My lawyer had already reviewed the requirements. I was obligated to attend, not actively engage. I challenged him to shift focus toward something useful, like preparing us for life after divorce. That ended the session. As expected, he followed through on his warning, and I was called before the judge. The judge, however, wasn't interested in forcing reconciliation. He simply suggested that understanding how things unraveled so quickly might benefit me in future relationships. He had a point, so I decided to prepare. At the next session, I handed both Anita and the therapist a document, detailed records of every time I had been fishing when she thought I was elsewhere. Carp ponds kept meticulous logs of arrivals and departures. If she truly believed I was sneaking off for affairs in a place that reeked of fish and mud, she clearly had no understanding of the environment. I acknowledged that I could have explained the use of protections and pantyhose in our bait-making process, but at the time, I hadn't seen the need. She stiffened. I laid it out clearly. She had only been half listening when I told her what I was doing. She had her own interests, going out with friends, shopping trips. I'd never once questioned her loyalty, even if she got too close on the dance floor or let her hands linger where they shouldn't. I trusted her, so I never searched her laundry for clues or checked her receipts. If I had ever suspected something, I would have talked to her. She had never given me that same courtesy. Instead of a conversation, she jumped to conclusions, and now here we were, sitting in front of a stranger, unraveling everything. The more I spoke, the more I realized how absurd it was. This was no one's business but ours. The entire situation infuriated me. It was the longest I had spoken in any of the sessions. The room fell into stunned silence. Then my phone rang. Smiling, I glanced at the time and stood. The session was over. Without another word, I walked out before either of them could respond. The following session felt different. Something had shifted. Anita met my eyes, calm for the first time. She didn't cry. Instead, she spoke with quiet resolve. She admitted she had finally accepted that there was no repairing the damage. She had ruined things beyond repair and wanted me to hear her side. She explained that in her eyes, I had been the perfect husband. I worked hard, rarely drank, and never cheated. She had been proud of me. Then I started fishing. At first, she had no reason to doubt me. But as I spent more time at the ponds, her friends started whispering. He must have a girlfriend. The doubts festered. A week before everything fell apart, a friend claimed to have seen me with another woman, laughing and hugging. She wanted to confront me, but fear held her back. Then came the moment at Walmart, when Jane mentioned the perfume, protections, and pantyhose. In her mind, it was undeniable proof. She had always fought her temper, but this time she lost. Her only thought was to hurt me the way she believed I had hurt her, so she reached out to the doctor. He had always been interested, and in that moment of anger, she gave in. She had never planned to confess. It would have been her secret revenge. But then, I came home early and everything collapsed. She admitted feeling ashamed, until her rage took over again. The moment I hit her lover with the fishing rod, she knew it was over. The tool had been a desperate reaction, a way to regain control. She had never intended to pull the trigger, but the temptation had been there. The only thing that stopped her was the look in my eyes when I told her to do it. That was the moment she realized she no longer mattered to me. The anger faded, but the confusion remained. Even when the police arrived, she had briefly considered shooting in their direction just to end it all. Tears welled in her eyes as she admitted that thought had haunted her. She had already lost me, but after that night she lost everything else too. Her friends disappeared. Work wasn't the same. The hospital kept her on staff because she was a skilled nurse, but management's attitude had changed. She had spent the last few months accepting that she had broken something that could never be fixed. Then, she made her decision. The counseling sessions were over. She was done trying. Without waiting for a response, she stood up and left. I turned to the therapist and asked if I should go after her. He studied me for a moment before shaking his head. If I wasn't concerned about her harming herself, I should let her go. She had already started healing, and so we divorced. She had no idea how much I had saved for our home. She had always trusted me with finances, never questioning the details. I made sure she received half. Moving out of our old apartment had been inevitable. The landlords weren't keen on keeping tenants who had fired a tool indoors. I rented a small studio closer to work, content with my new routine. Anita moved in with another nurse, claiming it was more economical and that she couldn't stand the emptiness of living alone. Friends encouraged me to start dating again, but I wasn't ready. My anger simmered beneath the surface, and I found myself lashing out, snapping at women for no reason. Eventually, I realized I didn't like the person I was becoming, and sought help. This time, my therapist was a woman. At first, the dynamic felt strange, but she quickly put me at ease. I opened up about everything. Anita, my bitterness, my struggle to trust women again. I admitted that I feared I was turning into someone who hated women. She raised an eyebrow at my phrasing before laughing. If I truly despised women, I wouldn't have chosen her as my therapist. If I saw her as just another witch trying to ruin my life, I wouldn't have sat across from her, searching for a way forward. She saw through me immediately. In her opinion, I was still in love, not with Anita as she was now, but with the person she used to be. My resentment toward women wasn't real. It was a defense mechanism, a way to shield myself from the pain. She believed I would heal, that I was too much of a gentleman to stay bitter forever. Eventually, I would recognize that not all women had hurt me, and I would stop treating them as if they had. I didn't respond, but I returned to see her 5 more times. Over time, I realized that my communication skills weren't always where they should be, and I still had moments of immaturity and selfishness. Acknowledging it was one thing, actively working to improve was another. My therapist also encouraged me to be upfront about my past with any future partner, flaws included, and to trust that the right person would accept them. If someone truly loved me, that should be enough. That advice gave me a sense of peace. 4 months later, my boss called me into his office. Waiting inside was a man I'd never met before, one of the company's vice presidents. After a quick introduction, he got straight to the point. He explained that out of the company's 11 branches, ours had the best performance record. Curious about what made it so successful, he had done some digging and kept hearing my name. There were major issues at their Alabama plant, and he was also dissatisfied with operations in Kentucky. They needed someone to step in and fix things. He offered me a position as a traveling trainer. My job would be to visit underperforming plants, identify problems, and recommend solutions. The role came with a substantial salary increase, company-covered housing and transportation, and performance-based bonuses. It was a test program with only 2 people chosen, one handling the West Coast and me covering everything east of the Mississippi. He gave me time to consider, but 4 days later I was on a plane to Alabama. Upon arrival, I was met by a man in a pickup truck who drove me to the apartment complex where I'd be staying for the next 10 weeks. The mechanical training and operational improvements were straightforward, and productivity immediately increased. However, the work environment was toxic. Management lacked trust in their employees and technical staff. The second shift supervisor was particularly problematic, micromanaging, implementing unnecessary changes, and then blaming the workers when production slowed. 7 weeks in, the same vice president showed up for an on-site evaluation. He was pleased with the progress, but noted it wasn't as drastic as he had hoped. He asked if anything was holding me back. I hesitated, and he caught it instantly. He made it clear that my job wasn't to rat people out, but if there were obstacles, whether personnel or equipment related, I needed to report them. Since I worked directly for him, I wasn't bound by the plant's usual chain of command, so there would be no backlash. Taking his words seriously, I explained the second shift management issues. Employees weren't the problem. The leadership was. Productivity would improve if supervisors trusted their teams instead of hovering over them. The VP listened, then laughed. He had told me to be honest, and now he had what he needed. 2 days later, the problematic supervisor was reassigned to my original plant for 2 weeks as part of a cross-training initiative. Unexpectedly, I was named interim manager. By the second week, production had increased by 17%. Unfortunately, the break didn't change him. A month after returning, he fell back into old habits, and I was sent back for 3 weeks to train his replacement. Afterward, I was off to Kentucky for 6 weeks, though that plant was already well run and only needed fine-tuning. Word spread quickly that I had direct access to the vice president, and anyone unwilling to cooperate soon found themselves in trouble. My job became easier and my bank account flourished. Since all expenses except food were covered, my savings grew rapidly. I started thinking seriously about buying a house within the next year. The week I returned from Kentucky, Billy and Zippy called a business meeting. One consequence of the divorce was that we had been banned from our local fishing spots, forcing Zippy to travel to compete. His mother, always full of ideas, had a suggestion. If you can't make money fishing, why not make money selling bait? You won't have to sit at a smelly pond all night. Just let the profits come in. It made sense. As a tribute, we named the product after her. A lawyer Billy's father recommended helped us secure the formula and establish the business. Thus, the magic of Mama Rosita was born, with her face proudly displayed on the packaging. Her reaction? A snort of amusement. So, this is my legacy. My face on a bucket of stinking fish bait. We started small, supplying local bait shops and a few carp ponds. Sales were slow at first, but steadily picked up until we could barely keep up with demand. To scale up, our lawyer found us a larger facility, and we sourced industrial mixers from bakery suppliers, massive machines capable of blending 200 pounds at a time. We bought corn grits, chicken livers, and perfume in bulk. Coffee grounds were harder to acquire until Billy struck a deal. In exchange for donations of fresh coffee to homeless shelters and soup kitchens, they would save their used grounds for us. The other three ingredients remained a closely guarded secret, mixed by Zippy in his old barn and delivered to the factory in unmarked bags. Despite running 2 shifts, demand kept outpacing production. When anglers discovered the bait worked for catfish too, sales skyrocketed. The turning point came when Walmart approached us. We had heard enough horror stories about their strict contracts and aggressive demands. When they insisted we increase production 5-fold to meet their terms, we politely declined, shocking them. Instead, we signed a 2-year deal with a major sporting goods chain, guaranteeing 3 times our current production with a flexible 3-month turnaround window. This led to another expansion. We acquired a larger facility and outfitted it with 160 mixers, each capable of churning out 500 pounds of bait at a time. Zippy left his job to manage the business full-time. His mother also quit her office job at a law firm, taking over operations for double her previous salary. We were officially an LLC. Zippy and Billy each owned a third, while I held a 20% stake as a silent partner. Mama Rosita had a 10% share. Without her, we wouldn't have gotten this far. A year and a half later, I finally returned home after 8 straight months of bouncing between plants. Work had even taken me across the river for a project near Kansas City. By then, I had gained a reputation at the company for my love of barbecue, collecting t-shirts from every place I visited. I had developed a preference for Alabama's mustard-based sauce and Kentucky's spicy brown sugar glaze. Each region had its own specialty, and even a short drive could introduce a whole new twist on flavor. Craving my favorite local spot, I walked in wearing my Kansas City barbecue t-shirt, nearly getting kicked out for it. The owner only relented after I explained it was a free giveaway and reassured him that his place was still the best. He handed me a house t-shirt and made me promise to wear it somewhere else and send him a photo. That's when I saw her. Nita walked in with a group, 2 women and another man. She didn't notice me right away, giving me a moment to take her in. She was thinner, her hair much shorter and lighter than I remembered. The sun had always suited her. Rather than wait for an inevitable awkward moment, I decided to take control of the situation. As they sat down, she laughed at something a friend said, but the moment her gaze landed on me, the laughter disappeared. Keeping my tone polite and casual, I greeted her, acknowledging that I didn't want it to feel awkward later. I complimented her new look, told her to enjoy her meal, and turned to leave. Her fingers brushed her hair, a small smile forming. She returned the compliment, noting that travel had done me good. I shrugged, explaining that when you're on the road as much as I was, you either spend your time in bars or at the gym. Since drinking had never been my thing, the choice was easy. I wished her well and turned to head back to my table. Just as I was settling in, a shadow loomed over me. I looked up to find her standing there, plate in hand. She hesitated only a moment before asking if she could sit with me. Her group had planned to get takeout, but now she wanted to stay a little longer. I stood and pulled out the chair for her, and just like that, we ate and talked, really talked. Nita surprised me with news that she had left the hospital and taken an office job with regular hours. The pay was slightly lower, but with her experience now solidified, she felt secure in her career. She also revealed she had been seeing a therapist monthly to manage her anger and maintain focus. I shared my own experience with therapy, which caught her off guard. Then came the question she had probably wanted to ask since she first saw me. She wanted to know if I was dating. I laughed, throwing her off balance. Relationships were difficult when constantly traveling. I had no interest in offering someone only a fraction of my time. It wouldn't be fair. She admitted she had tried dating but never got past 3 dates with anyone. It wasn't surprising. Realistically, I hadn't expected her to become a nun. To shift the conversation, she pointed at my t-shirt collection and asked what was up with it. That led to stories of my travels, the bizarre foods I had tried, and the most memorable places I'd visited. She cringed at my descriptions of alligator barbecue, armadillo, which I wouldn't recommend, and surprisingly good ostrich steak. Eventually, she checked the time and realized she was late. As she got up to leave, she thanked me for the evening, saying it had been really good to see me again. Then, without warning, She leaned in and kissed me. Before I could react, she was already heading for the door. On the table, she had left a business card with her office number written on the back. I hesitated for a moment before slipping it into my wallet. We kept in touch, occasionally meeting when I was home. She seemed to want something more, but I just couldn't go back. Eventually, she moved on and started dating a nurse from another office. Meanwhile, my life kept moving forward. Between work and the gym, I found a new interest: online classes. I wanted more than just a traveling trainer position. When my boss learned about my studies, he had the company pay for my courses, calling it an investment. With limited college experience, I completed my business management degree in just 2.5 years. My diploma arrived in the mail, a proud achievement, though bittersweet with no one to share it with. Soon after, my boss called me into the main office, where he introduced me to my replacement. My traveling days were coming to an end. He acknowledged my contributions and how hard life on the road could be, especially for someone young. Now that I had my degree, he had a new opportunity for me. The manager at my home plant was retiring, and the production manager was moving up. That left an opening on his team, and he thought I was the right fit. I had 2 months to decide. If I accepted, I would have 4 months before stepping into the role. He also hinted that the new production manager wouldn't be around forever, and promotions were always given to those within the company. It was time to settle down. Traveling had been fun, but waking up under the same roof every day sounded better. That's when I met Molly. She was from Alabama, had bright red hair, and a body similar to Nita's, except with a more generous figure. As the production coordinator, we often worked together when I was in town. We connected over our shared love for fishing. She owned a boat, something she had fought hard to keep after her divorce. Her ex, a serial cheater and die-hard fisherman, had spared no expense on a top-of-the-line Ranger boat. When their marriage ended, she gave up other assets just to claim it as revenge. For a year, it sat unused until she finally took it out, and she fell in love with fishing. Unlike her ex, she wasn't into bass fishing. She was after massive catfish, with her record catch weighing 28 pounds. I casually asked what bait she used. At the time, we hadn't yet signed with a sporting goods store, so our bait was still a local operation. The next time I was in town, we made plans to take her boat out. I brought 5 pounds of our bait along. Catfish fishing, much like carp fishing, was best at night. We set off a couple of hours before sunset, floating lazily around the lake. At one point, I caught myself watching a couple of women on a nearby boat. Molly noticed, and without saying a word, she slipped off her shirt, revealing an incredibly small bikini top that left little to the imagination. She laughed at my expression, clearly amused. Her playful smirk said it all. She had my full attention now. We reached her favorite fishing spot, an inlet at the mouth of the bay, and anchored. Casting our lines, we cracked open a couple of beers. 40 minutes and 3 bottles later, she got bored. Then she surprised me. Without hesitation, she climbed onto my lap, straddling me. Her green eyes held a teasing challenge. She saw my hesitation and smirked. Fishing could wait. I jokingly asked what we were supposed to do about the fish, but she had already made up her mind. That night, the lake became more than just a fishing spot, and by the time the stars came out, I wasn't thinking about catfish anymore. As we slowly made our way back to the marina, known for weighing record catches, the dock hands nearly fell over when Molly revealed her haul. She wanted to weigh 8 fish, and the largest tipped the scales at 69 pounds, a new lake record. The marina kept it in a live well until a state official arrived to verify the catch, knowing the publicity would bring more fishermen. Over the next 2 days, Molly was featured in newspapers, a wildlife magazine, and even a TV interview. I was briefly mentioned as her fishing partner. When asked about her bait, she smirked and vaguely said it was a commercial product anyone could buy, leaving people guessing. She more than made up for the earlier interruption on the boat, and from then on, she made sure we had our fun before we ever cast a line. She was adventurous, witty, and easy on the eyes. Just when I was considering something more serious, she canceled our plans. That evening, I saw her at a restaurant, cozy with another man. Their body language made it clear they weren't just friends. She disappeared for the weekend, then took time off work. A month later, she was back, affectionate as ever, but she quickly noticed my cold demeanor. With a sigh, she admitted that I had seen her. She explained that Brad, her long-term boyfriend, had been overseas for nearly a year on a work contract. He had gotten an unexpected leave, and they would eventually marry. Their arrangement was simple. What they did while apart wasn't each other's business. She called me a great guy, even complimented my skills and suggested we continue seeing each other since Brad wouldn't be back for another 8 months. I declined. While it didn't matter to him, it mattered to me. I wished her well but never touched her again, except when helping her land the monster catfish she kept pulling in. Other fishermen studied her closely, trying to figure out her secret. They even searched her boat, but she kept her bait locked in a fridge at her dad's garage. Eventually, she broke her own record, landing a 77-pound catfish. She sent me a picture. It was bigger than her, and beside her stood a grinning man. I assumed it was Brad. They looked happy. Her winning streak continued until our bait hit local stores, making it accessible to everyone. Once the exclusivity was gone, her advantage disappeared. By the time I returned home for good, I was ready to put down roots. I bought an 8-acre property with a decent-sized pond, a tractor, and enough land for a small vegetable garden. I dated, earned a reputation as an eligible bachelor, and enjoyed my freedom. But I never found someone I wanted to spend forever with. That changed the day I came home to find 2 unexpected visitors on my porch. Anita sat on the swing, beside a little girl who looked about 8, and strikingly like her. She greeted me with a smile, complimenting my house before hesitating, as if unsure how to continue. Finally, she explained that she wasn't there for herself, but for her daughter, Annie. Annie wanted to learn how to fish, and Anita believed I was the best person to teach her. She looked at me with wide, hopeful eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. I noticed the quiet sadness in Anita's smile and wondered what had caused it. Figuring I had nothing to lose, I asked if Annie had brought a fishing rod. Anita's grin widened, lighting up her face. They hadn't, but I had plenty of gear. By the time we were ready, I was loaded down like a pack mule, chairs, a cooler, and rods. I handed Annie a small, lightweight rod perfect for her size. First, I had her practice casting with a weighted line across the field until she got the hang of it. She was so serious about it that I nearly laughed. Then, I baited the hook with a worm from my garden and showed her where to cast. With the natural drag in my pond, I knew she'd catch something eventually. Anita sat back, sipping iced tea, watching us with an expression I still recognized. I wondered if she had a plan. She was 28 now, in her prime, and it showed. I briefly questioned why anyone would wear a sundress to go fishing. Then Annie screamed. She had hooked something big. I was beside her in an instant, coaching her through it, while Anita rushed over, cheering her on. It was a crappie, something I didn't even know lived in my pond. When I mentioned they were great eating, Annie immediately insisted we let it go. I struck a deal. I'd release it if she promised to eat it. Turns out Annie was a natural. She reeled in 9 crappie, all good-sized. As we packed up, I asked when she wanted her fish dinner. Tonight, maybe? Annie hesitated, glancing at Anita, who suddenly looked somber before pulling the little girl into a hug. Anita's voice softened. She might stay a little longer if you fry her fish. 2 sets of big, hopeful eyes stared up at me. How could I possibly say no? Annie showed no hesitation as I cleaned the fish, watching intently while I placed them in lemon water. Taking it as an invitation, Anita took over my kitchen, guiding Annie through making hush puppies and tartar sauce while I handled coleslaw. I fired up the gas grill to roast corn and used the side burner to heat the oil. Annie observed as I dipped the fillets in a milk and egg wash before coating them in seasoned flour. Before frying, I warned her to stand back. Hot oil was unforgiving. Anita kept her busy setting the picnic table and pouring tea while she pulled the corn off the grill. In no time, those 9 crappie had turned into golden fillets. As I showed Annie how to eat around the bones, she devoured 4 crappie, an ear of corn, coleslaw, and at least 6 hush puppies. I had no idea where she was putting it all. After dinner, Anita settled Annie on the couch while I put away the fishing gear. Sitting on the porch swing, I listened to Anita softly singing in the kitchen and watched the little girl sleeping peacefully inside. Unexpected tears stung my eyes. This was supposed to be my life. A small tug on my sleeve broke my thoughts. Annie had woken up and stood beside me. Without thinking, I lifted her onto my lap, rocking gently. She nestled in and drifted back to sleep. I felt her presence before I saw her. Through the dim glow of the porch light, Anita stood behind the mosquito net, silently watching, tears in her eyes. Without a word, she turned and disappeared inside. Minutes later, she returned with 2 cups of coffee, placing them on the side table before settling beside me. She curled up, playing with Annie's hair, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I let the moment linger before finally speaking. "What's going on, Anita?" She sighed, her grip tightening on my hand. Annie wasn't her daughter. She was her niece. Anita's sister Jen had divorced years ago and raised Annie alone. Then, out of nowhere, her ex reappeared, wanting to make amends. Jen, already engaged to someone else, brushed him off, telling him Annie already had a father figure waiting. He didn't take it well. One night, high and furious, he broke into her home and opened fire on Jen and her fiancé while Annie slept in the next room. Annie woke to the sound of deafening bangs. By the time she got up, her father was gone. She was the one who had to call emergency. My chest tightened. Social services had been ready to take her, but Anita intervened. Their mother wasn't able to raise a child at her age, so Anita petitioned for custody. She was now Annie's legal guardian. With a shaky breath, she admitted she'd been thinking about this for a long time. When she heard I had stopped traveling, it felt like fate. Annie needed a father, and Anita could think of no one better than me. The little girl had taken to me instantly, something Anita had never seen before. Watching her curl up in my arms had confirmed it. This was meant to be. She didn't ask for us to be together again. She didn't beg for a second chance. She only asked for a piece of my heart, at least for Annie, and maybe, just maybe, a small place in my life. I wasn't sure when my arm had wrapped around her, but I held her close, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. At some point, we all drifted off like that. When I woke, Annie was already stirring. Blinking up at me, she whispered, "I need to go to the bathroom." I gently woke Anita, who led her inside. Checking my watch, I realized it was almost midnight. This was definitely going to throw off Annie's sleep schedule. Anita returned, smiling. "It's too late to drive home," and she's thrilled about the sleepover. She mentioned Annie had spotted my oversized bathtub and decided she needed a bath. And apparently, she had also chosen one of my t-shirts to sleep in. I set up the guest bed, making sure the blankets were warm and the pillows fluffed. When Annie appeared in my shirt, almost dragging on the floor, she crawled into bed, demanding a story. I obliged, tucking her in. Half asleep, she mumbled, "You should kiss me goodnight." So I did. Right then, Anita walked in, her smile glowing. I felt like a fish caught on a hook, wriggling but already lost. Her own borrowed t-shirt fit very differently, barely covering anything. Her mamillas pressed against the fabric, making her intentions clear. Sliding under the covers beside Annie, she smirked. "She got a goodnight kiss? Where's mine?" The kiss was surprisingly soft, void of lust, just warmth and tenderness. As she pulled away, her fingers brushed my cheek. "You're still the best man I've ever known," she whispered. "Good night." That night, sleep barely came. With two angels in my house, my mind raced with a question I had been avoiding for years. Had I ever truly let go of Anita, and was it time to try again? When I woke up, the house was empty. A small disappointment, but reality awaited. While working in the garden, Anita and Annie returned. The little girl ran straight to me, excited about staying for the weekend and eager to help. Anita, with her usual playful confidence, made it clear they weren't asking for permission. They were staying. Annie spent the next hour learning about gardening, carefully tying up tomato plants and picking ripe vegetables. She was fascinated by the small green snake we spotted in the corn, but quickly became more interested in carrying two rescued turtles back to the pond. She proudly brought the basket of fresh produce inside, eager to show Anita. After washing up, they prepared lunch, simple ham and cheese sandwiches with fresh tomato slices. Annie ate quickly, then took a long bubble bath before announcing she was taking a nap. She made me promise to wake her if anything exciting happened, though I wasn't sure what an 8-year-old considered exciting. With the kitchen cleaned, Anita joined me on the porch, both of us rocking in silence. After a while, she finally spoke, reflecting on the past, her regrets, and how much she had changed. She admitted she had been young, angry, and had made terrible choices. Now, she was a different person, raising a child who needed stability. She made her intentions clear. She wanted me back in her life, even if only as a father figure for Annie. She understood my hesitation, knowing trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But she asked for a chance, promising that if I didn't want this, she would walk away without a fight. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes as she waited for my response. Instead of answering, I asked about the zoo trip the next day. Understanding my meaning, she smiled, knowing I wasn't saying no. As the evening continued, Annie woke up and climbed onto my lap, making it clear she expected me to be part of their plans. Anita teased that we needed groceries, and I soon found myself driving them into town. During the ride, she admired my SUV, casually commenting on how successful I must be. It hit me then. She had no idea how much I'd made from the bait business. While my job paid well by local standards, my side business had multiplied my income several times over. At the store, my usual quick shopping routine was derailed. Annie attempted to sneak every snack possible into the cart while Anita meticulously compared prices. 30 minutes in, I was ready to give up. Anita, enjoying my frustration, joked that I better get used to it since shopping would sometimes be my job. I asked why, and her answer stopped me in my tracks. She casually mentioned a future where she would either be in the hospital delivering our babies or recovering at home. Then, without waiting for my reaction, she simply continued shopping. For a moment, I stood frozen in the aisle, trying to process what had just happened. After years of resisting, I had been outmaneuvered again. But I claimed a small victory by adding T-bone steaks to our grocery cart. Anita protested about red meat until I pointed out she didn't have to eat it. On the way out, she suddenly steered us into a store next to the market, picking out a new car seat for Annie. Confused, I asked if hers needed replacing. That familiar smug smile appeared. This wasn't for her car, but for mine. She had already decided we'd be using my SUV for family trips, given its space and comfort. As I carried the car seat to checkout, Annie rushed off, pulling Anita toward a swing set on display. Her excitement was instant, but reality hit when Anita explained it was too expensive and they didn't have anywhere to install it. Annie, undeterred, turned to me with hopeful eyes, suggesting my yard was the perfect place. Then, as if stating the obvious, she declared that they could just move in with me. Anita bit her lip, barely holding back a smile. Annie, ever serious, explained they couldn't just move in yet. They had to first prove how much they loved me. She reminded Anita of her own words, how much she still loved me, and figured they could try. I scooped her up, gently deflecting, telling her this was an adult decision she'd understand when she was older. For now, I promised to consider the swing set. It wasn't quite a yes, but close enough to satisfy her. That night, we grilled steaks, corn, and potatoes, eating outside while Annie ran through the grass, something she rarely got to do in the city. As the evening settled in, we took her to the pond with a lantern, helping her cast a fishing rod. Within minutes, she was reeling in a 5-pound catfish. She looked disappointed when I let it go, but I assured her we'd come back and catch enough for a fish fry. By the time we wrapped up, she had caught 3, Anita 2. Annie, brimming with pride, announced she had won. Anita reminded her she'd had help, to which Annie grinned and declared that next time she'd sit on my lap again for a guaranteed victory. Later that night, after getting Annie to bed with a bedtime story, I found Anita in my bed. She stretched with a smile, making it clear she wasn't there for closeness, just to be close. It felt strange, after all these years, to hold her again. Familiar, but different. Without overthinking, I let her settle into my arms, and, for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, Annie woke me by tugging on my nose, announcing that breakfast was ready, and we needed to leave soon. The zoo trip exhausted her. She ran from one exhibit to another, determined to see everything. By the time we got home, she was fast asleep, and I once again carried her to the car. A routine formed. Every Friday, they arrived. Every Sunday, they left. Around town, people began recognizing us as a family again. It was Zippy who finally pushed me toward a decision. At a barbecue, while the kids played, he pulled me aside and reminded me that everyone had known Anita had a temper. She had made a mistake, a big one, but she had paid for it. He urged me to let go of the past. Mama Rose chimed in, calling Annie one of the luckiest children, going from tragedy to a loving mother and father. Billy and June agreed. For weeks, I thought about it. Then luck intervened. Anita, caught up at work, called in a panic, asking me to pick up Annie from kindergarten. When I arrived, she ran into my arms, proudly introducing me to her teachers and friends as if I were the most important person in the world. During the drive home, I decided it was time for a real conversation. Her eyes widened as she listened, and then she started crying. At first, I panicked, thinking I had upset her, but she was crying from happiness. By the time Anita got home, Annie was calm, but practically buzzing with excitement. She grabbed Anita's hand and led her outside. Anita froze when she saw it. A brand new swing set, bigger than the one in the store, complete with a slide, a playhouse, and everything a child could dream of. Annie beamed, explaining that there was just one condition. She couldn't have the swing unless she lived here, and since she couldn't live here alone, Anita had to move in too. Then, as if sealing the deal, Annie handed her a small wrapped box. I watched from a distance as Anita unwrapped it. Her hands trembled, and when she saw the ring inside, she gasped, then let out a soft cry. Annie, practically bouncing, reminded her this was the moment she was supposed to say yes. Stepping out from behind the tree, I met Anita's tear-filled gaze. And just like that, her smug smile returned. "I'll think about it," she teased. But she already had. 36 years later, 3 kids, 7 grandkids, and 2 more on the way, the final verdict is still out. Over the years, we learned not to panic when we couldn't immediately find each other. Anita had always been prone to worry, but eventually I had to draw the line. Trust was a choice, and I made mine clear. After that, she backed off, mostly. At some point, she finally discovered how much I was worth. The next day, she quit her job and tossed out her birth control. For the next 20 years, she dedicated herself to raising our children, shuttling them to every event imaginable, until they were grown and on their own. Then came the adventures. We traveled, took cruises, explored both warm and frozen landscapes, and saw the world. Eventually, content, we settled into a quieter life. Wanting to give back, we joined a program helping at-risk kids, offering temporary homes for those in need, from infants to teenagers. Some stayed for months, others longer. Many earned scholarships, pursued careers, and a few even made it to college. Then, everything changed. One evening, I came home to find Anita standing in the doorway, her expression troubled. A small head with dark curls peeked out from behind her. Gently, she coaxed the little girl forward, holding her close. She was 4. She had been badly beaten. The scars, physical and emotional, would stay with her forever. I didn't need any details. One look at her, and I saw her future. Dance recitals, driving lessons, school plays, first dates. I turned to Anita and said the only word that mattered. Yes, and that was that. Was